Okay. Well, welcome. I should take my mask off as I do this. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today as we provide a 2021 Nampa City Budget Overview session. I'm going to call this a little bit of a Budget 101 because our intent is to provide, one, a very high-level overview of the budget, but to put it in a way that it makes sense and anyone can comprehend it. So, but let's get started. As we get started, I'm going to go to a slide that talks about the timeline that we've been in our budget process. So, when we start doing budget, in fact, right now I'm already thinking about 2022 budget. So we begin thinking about budget long before it actually takes place. But our budget process began in the spring, where we're looking and considering budget. We just did have a budget workshop with the council. And even though if anyone were to watch that online, which you're welcome to watch it online the whole day, we did take a vote, but that vote is not a binding vote that we're done. So when we ask you for input, just know that the vote doesn't mean we're done. The vote means that the council said yes to the budget that we presented to them, which was a good process. But the next step is a public hearing that's coming on August 17th. But later, we'll talk about that and give you a little bit more information. So I want you to know, as citizens, that during this challenging time, that we're thinking of you and that we're thinking of our economy. Our goal is to reduce the levy rates, which is taxes, while continuing to provide the needed services to our citizens. So we did not take the allowed 3% increase. We took 0 increase, and we made that decision a couple months ago. That wasn't something we just decided, but as we were watching this COVID environment and the challenges that our citizens were facing and our businesses were facing, we decided that we needed to provide as much relief as possible. And then our long-term goal is to get that levy rate down and to reduce taxes. So that was our focus as we stepped into this. So, but I am not going to go into the budget because our Director of Finance, Doug Racine, will be. But as we get started, I want to remind us, Nampa is the largest full-service city in the state of Idaho. We do our own water, our wastewater, our irrigation, water, storm drains, and streets. And then we also have the airport, the Civic Center, and the Fort Idaho Center. So as a full-service city, we provide services in all those places. So our budget is comprehensive, and there's a lot of work to do. And as a reminder that we have always funded, and we still do fund, a percentage of streets out of our general fund budget. Whereas in Ada County, they have ACHD, we do our own streets in the city of Nampa because we don't have a comprehensive highway district like that. As I've said many times, and I'll say it again, fiscal stewardship is our focus. So in every budget with every department, and I appreciate our department heads really working to maintain flat budgets this year, fiscal stewardship is something that we remind them of all through the process. And so we want to respond to the current challenges while we're also preparing for the future. So over the last 3 years, we've had a community survey. And I think the community survey is going to come up on the screen. And what you said for the last 3 years, the only shift has been, it was public safety #1. This last time the survey says streets is #1, followed by public safety and then economic opportunity. So those are focused. When we're looking at our funding, we're always keeping in mind what our citizens are telling us as is important to them. The other thing that you guys have said is that growth needs to fund growth. So with that, when you see an increase in budget, it has to do with impact fees and also new construction revenue that we are using to fund the needs of the city rather than doing the 3% increase. We're using our new construction revenue, which equates to growth, funding growth. So as we dig into the budget, I would like to introduce to you our Director of Finance, Doug Racine, and I want to thank Doug as he comes up. We do our distancing thing here. Since we're not 6 feet, we'll get those masks on. I also want to say a thank you to Ed Carras, our Assistant Finance Director. But Doug's going to go over the details of our budget, and I tell you what, he's done an excellent job, and I greatly appreciate your work. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Mayor.
Really appreciate it.
Great, now I can take the mask off and share some of the work that went into creating and preparing the fiscal 2021 budget. So as the mayor indicated, I am Doug Racine. I am the Director of Finance for the City of Nampa. And it's my pleasure to share the results of our 2021 budget process. So what I'd like to do is start at the end. Let's look and see what the budget resulted in terms of how it's going to impact you as residents. Oh, well, that was, I think I went backwards here. There we go, got it, almost there. Got it right. Okay, took a second, but I got it. So let's look at the levy rate. This is a chart that shows the levy rate over the last 5 years. And we can see that in 2016, the levy rate was 0.009028. I'm just going to read the first 5 digits. And we can see it steadily decreased in 2017 to 0.008512, and in 2018 to 0.007839, last year to 0.007031, and this year the preliminary levy rate for fiscal 2021 is 0.006656. Over 5 years, that's a 26% decrease in the levy rate. That's a pretty remarkable decrease, and that's been accomplished because of 2 primary reasons. One, we've had consistent fiscal control over the budgets. The city has focused, prior to my tenure and during my tenure, on spending wisely, on exercising our fiduciary responsibility. The second aspect of this is the increasing valuations of the homes. Those 2 aspects together are driving the levy rate downward. And this year, a big impact is the fact that we did not take a 3% or any portion thereof increase in the tax rates. So that's good news for the tax burden on the citizens. So let's go over some of the big things that we focused on this year. It was a year of budgetary change, and what we wanted to accomplish really focused on driving visibility and clarity in the budget. With the assistance and the guidance of Ed Carras, our budget officer and assistant finance director, we looked at the opportunities we had to change processes that resulted in more visibility in the processes. And we changed some accounting, we changed some budget, we changed how we did budgeting for positions and FTEs. But the most effective and the most important and critical was the very first item on the screen was we had a 0% increase. Now, for the past 3 years, we have had some degree of less than 3%, but this year we went all the way to 0 because that's what we felt was required in the face of the uncertain circumstances. This required, from our perspective, a lot of saying no to what we'd normally have considered as budgetary increases in costs. We limited our spending to new construction dollars. So I want to be clear on this. This is not a new tax. This is taking last year's levy rate and applying it to brand new construction, whether that be real estate for personal, residential, or commercial, or agricultural. It is last year's levy rate applied to new construction. And that amounted to about 1.7, or will amount to about $1.7 million. Not a new rate, but a tax on existing, or on new construction. And that's the only new money we spent from a property tax perspective. So with that limitation, we had to focus on limiting our budgetary spending authority. So we had to say no a lot to new requests. And we focused on keeping our spending where at all possible to prior year levels. So unless there was a cost that we literally could not avoid where the increase was coming, we would keep that to a prior year cost increase. Now, I want to go on to some of the budgetary groupings here. And before we look at the numbers, I want to explain just a little bit of the categories. When we look at the general government budget, general government is comprised of police, fire, mayor, IT, finance, HR. That's the core. We are the structure that the government forms around. We organize everything else. And that's primarily supported by tax dollars, but we'll get into that in a moment. When we look at the enterprise fund, and each of these funds has a different structure on how we can use monies. Enterprise funds include water, wastewater, sanitation, our development services, and special revenue funds include the airport, cemetery, library, parks and recs. A question might come up, what's the difference between an enterprise fund and a special revenue fund? Enterprise funds are the most closely related to a business organization that a government will operate. A special revenue fund takes a fund and operates it for one specific purpose. We take property taxes and dedicate them to operating the library. We take property taxes and dedicate them to operating streets. We take funds and dedicate them to operating the airport, the cemetery, and so forth. They're a special revenue fund. And finally, we have internal service funds where we have funds designed to service internally the other aspects of the city. And then we have capital projects, and finally, the debt service. So let's go through the numbers here really quickly. The general government has a budget of $58.2 million. That's up from the $58 million last year, up only $207,000. There are some shifts in and around the budgeting process, but the increase is due to the new construction dollars, and we kept everything else very much at or below last year's totals. The enterprise funds, $80.692 million compared with last year's $76.8. That's a $3.5 million increase, and that's primarily due to additional water capital projects. As a growing city, and as a city that's been around for a long time, we have a lot of capital required to maintain the water infrastructure. And special revenue. This one's very important. This has a lot to do, almost entirely. We went to $48.9 million, up from $44.3 million last year. That increase is almost entirely due, in fact, it is entirely due, to the Amazon construction project. We received monies from them, about $5.5 million in pass-through funds. We don't keep them, but in lieu of new impact fees, we receive $5.5 million that will be passed through to IDT to be used for the improvement of roads and infrastructure in and around the Amazon site. But they have to be recognized and they show up as an increase, but they're strictly a pass-through. We do not keep the money, we just strictly pass it through. Capital projects actually decreased a little bit. We had a little less money to spend, so we decreased some of our capital expenditures, down $1.1 million from the prior year. Internal service went up a little bit, but that's because we created a fleet fund to move them from general government out so that we could handle the increasing needs of our fleet services. As we grow as a city, and as we strive to meet the needs of the fire department, the police department, and parks, we have increased vehicle needs. And the fleet department services those. So we had to find a way to meet their growing needs. And by doing so, the way we found to do so is to move them into their own internal service fund. So that shows up as an increase, but it's just a reclassification from general government. The debt service fund, finally, that is the city's general obligation bond, which will mature in September of 2024. At that point in time, it will be paid off. So we can see that the total funds increased $8.9 million. But keep in mind that the majority of that was the increase in capital projects and from Amazon. There was no ongoing increase in operation expenses, no increase in any measurable labor costs. We kept all those very much in check for the year. If we look at the budget on a slightly different perspective, the same $202 million budget, but we look at it in terms of our revenue sources, we can see that the city's largest revenue source is actually fees and services of $77.6 million. That's fees and services for, and I'll go into this in a little more detail in a subsequent graph, but that's wastewater, water, irrigation, sanitation, and so forth. And that's up $14 million. There are three major components of that increase. Again, there's actually a total of $7 million of Amazon funds in there, the $5.5 million I mentioned earlier from pass-through funds. There's an additional $1.5 million of monies we will be eligible to spend if Amazon meets their internally imposed completion deadlines. And we have an increase in sewer hookup fees, that's growth, funding growth. And we have an increase of $2 million in wastewater fees as part of the wastewater treatment plant development. Property taxes. We mentioned the increase in $1.7 million from new construction. We can see it there where property taxes go from 44.5 to 46.5. It's there's 1.7 in new construction monies and $0.3 million in a timing impact from the general obligation bond. That's timing. It's not a new tax, just a timing impact. Grants and loans. That's up $6 million. $4 million of that is DEQ loan for the wastewater treatment plant. It's not a revenue. We eventually have to pay that back. But we do have $2.5 million in new street grants for the development of streets projects. Transfers, those are, as we mentioned, that the general government is, we form the core of the city's services. We charge for those services. So for HR and the mayor's office and finance and IT, all those charges get costed out to the various departments. So we have transfers, and that forms a major portion of that. The next line, shared revenues. Those are revenues that come from the state primarily. That's two primary components, the state shared sales taxes and shared highway district taxes for the streets. They're about roughly $7 million each. But those have gone down this year, $817,000. That's primarily a COVID-19 impact because we've seen a decrease in volume. And it's also one of those areas that has a degree of uncertainty to it. We don't know exactly where this will actually land next year. We're relying on AIC guidance and a little bit of hope that it actually comes in where it's projected, but there is a degree of uncertainty in those lines that we won't really realize until we get there. Fund balance, this is where in certain accounts where in the wastewater or streets or water where we have accumulated funds in one year with the intent of spending them in the subsequent year, we've actually decreased that spend, $13 million this year, 13.5, but we are going to spend $10 million from fund balance for various projects in water, wastewater, and streets primarily. And then there's some miscellaneous income and impact fees. We are leveraging our impact fees a little more this year so that we can do more of the intersections across the city. We're increasing that by $582,000 to help facilitate meet some of the needs. And again, that comes down to the $202 million budget for the year. So let's look at the breakout in this fund in terms of how it all looks in terms of percentage. I hope this is visible well, comes across on the screen. We can see that fees and services are 38.4% of the city's total budget. But keep in mind that while that's 38.4 and the property taxes are 23, those funds are dedicated. I can't take money from the property taxes or from the fees and start moving them around without proper legal authority. So they're dedicated to their services. Grants and loans are 12.9%. The $4 million from the DEQ loan, that's in there. Grants are in there for various aspects. Transfers, the shared revenues, the $14 million, the fund balance. Those are all of our sources of revenues for next year in total. But let's drill down one level deeper. Let's go to the sources of revenues just for the general government, and let's look at that. For the city, for the general government, 63.8% of our support comes from property taxes. 13.8% comes from the shared revenue. That's the sales taxes and the highway taxes. Transfers, where we're charging other city departments for our services. Fees and services, grants, and other miscellaneous charges. But you can see that the property taxes form the backbone of the income for the city. Any change in that level makes it difficult to provide essential services. So if we look at this number, and we'll discuss it a little more. In fact, I'll do it in the next slide. I want to go into a little depth of how we use these in terms of public safety. So let's go to the next slide here. We can see that this is the usage of property taxes. So while $37.1 million of our total property taxes go to general gov, we can see that it's broken down with $2.1 million going to streets, airports, and the cemetery getting very small pieces. The park's getting about $2 million, the library getting 2.2, and the general obligation bond getting $2.7 million. But look at that $37.1 million for the general government. Let's put that in terms of public safety. The budgets for fire and police alone are $38.6 million. So those two critical services, which we all rely on, thoroughly use up the entirety of the general government property tax monies we get. So we have to supplement the remainder of the general government with the shared services, with some miscellaneous income, with transfers to make the budget balanced. We're required to create a balanced budget. I can't have an unbalanced budget. So the property taxes form an essential aspect. So by keeping our property taxes flat this year, it was an effort to do so. It was the right thing to do, but it was an effort to do so. So I promised to get back to this slide. This shows the fees and services. This is the largest single source of funds, but you can see it's not really a single source of funds. It's a multitude. Wastewater. These are the fees that we charge for wastewater, which is $23.6 million. That's the largest single slice, $30 million, or 30.4%. Sanitation, 16%. Water, 11%. Streets, 9%. And on down the list. Through the rec center, Idaho Center, and even down to 911 at $950,000. These are the fees and services that run also additional essential city services and beneficial city services. But they're not property tax dollars, but they're fees and services that help provide benefits to the citizens of the city. Let's look at the budget in one other context. These are the cost categories. The same $202 million. This is presented in millions, not in whole dollars, but in millions. Personal services, $61.7 million. In total, that's up about $500,000 from last year. That's an extremely minimal increase. We did have a few staff increases in the number of staff for critical positions. We added a couple of new police positions. We had a few critical market adjustments. But overall, that's a very minor increase in labor for the entire city to go through. That's extremely small. Operations, it's up $9.8 million. And that's almost entirely due to the Amazon and the fleet reorg. You recall there was a total of $7 million in Amazon costs coming in. That's 9.8. And the fleet was 1.7. It's almost entirely due to fleet and Amazon. Capital is down a little bit. As indicated, we're trying to control the expenses and spend exactly what we need and no more. so we decreased that a little bit. Debt service is the general obligation bond plus the debt payments for the wastewater treatment plant that we are currently engaged in. So the increase in the budget over last year was very, very controlled. And in fact, if we were to dig deeper into that numbers, we would find that a portion of this is actually a rollover from the prior year, where some expenses that had been budgeted in the prior year were not able to have been accomplished. And these were primarily capital investments in street and water and wastewater that were moved into this year. If we were able to strip these components out, the increase from the prior year would probably be maybe $2 to $3 million alone. So it's one of those impacts where it's hard to exactly project what projects can be done each year, given the available resources. However, overall, we've done a very good job, I think, as a budgetary group in conjunction with all of the departments in the city to develop a budget and propose a budget that does not impose any additional burden on the citizens of the city, yet still manages to meet the basic needs and allows us to move forward with a strong foundational structure by creating visibility and more clarity of the budgets going forward. And with that, I'll end with a short discussion on the capital. I've talked that it's gone down $1.5 million. You can see here, if you look all the way to the bottom of this chart, the second line up, third line up from the bottom, the biggest investment in our capital is wastewater. 31.6 million this year versus 32 last year. That is the wastewater treatment plant mandated by the Department of Environmental Quality. That's a multi-year upgrade of our wastewater treatment plant. If you take that out, we have a very small capital spend overall, but that's the most significant portion. The only other area where they have an increase in the significant increase in the capital spend was recreation. They went up $1.3 million. That's a rollover from the prior year where we did not spend it last year, but it will be spent this year. That's some of those monies that shift from one bucket to the next. It just shows up at an increase in 2 years and actually makes the budget look like an increase in 2 years where it actually is not. So with that, I believe that's the end of the budget presentation. I will turn it back to the mayor.
Doug, thank you so much. Really appreciate your work. I tell you what, Doug worked very diligently, and you did an outstanding job.
Couldn't have done it without the team.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope that you all have found this beneficial. I tell you what, just really understanding where those dollars go is important. And the budget is complex, and it's not easy to actually bring it down to something that's in kind of bite-sized to understand. But I really appreciate Doug's work and his efforts, and our commitment to you is that we are trying to be stewards, good stewards of the hard-earned dollars, those tax dollars that come into the city. You know, one thing I wasn't going to say, but I'm going to go ahead and say it, and that is that if the assessed value on your homes had stayed the same, your taxes would have gone down significantly over the last number of years. And at a later time, we'll be sharing the data on that. But where you see an increase in taxes, it has to do with the assessed values of homes. And I want you all to understand that is not the city. The city does not have the authority over assessments. It's really a state statute that needs to be changed along with the homeowner's exemption. Because where you see an increase, it's because the assessed values have gone up so significantly over the last couple of years. Your levy rate's going down, and if your home value had stayed the same, you would have seen a significant decrease in the taxes from the city of Nampa. But unfortunately, we don't control those assessed values. So that's a whole different topic, and we'll talk about that at a later time. So thank you again to Doug. At this time, I would like to introduce Amy Bowman. Amy, and I'll put my mask back on so you can come up. Amy's our communications manager and does an amazing job. And she's going to talk to you and wrap us up today. to talk to us about kind of what the plan is for communication. So Amy, thank you so much. Oh, and I forgot that, right?
Do you want to?
No, you can do it.
Okay, thank you. My name is Amy Bowman, and thank you, Mayor. If Mark, you could show the picture of the directors. Each one of these men and women up here are rock stars, and as we like to call them, municipal heroes. What you don't see is the long hours, the weekends that all these directors and a lot of staff put in behind the scenes for our community because we love Nampa, and we are Nampa. So as a way for the community to engage with the budget process, this year we made it a little bit easier for you to contact the directors directly, which I'm sure they'll love. Sorry, guys. So these are email addresses. If you have a specific question related to the budget, feel free to email the department directly. You can also just email the mayor's office, and we will do our best. We appreciate your patience as we try to gather that information. The budget is available on our website, cityofnampa.us/finance. You can download the proposed budget as well. You can go back and listen to this presentation. We are working hard to really connect with the community where they're at. We have a lot of different ways for the community to engage, to communicate with us. I think a lot of people email the mayor's email, mayor@cityofnampa.us. We do our best to respond as soon as possible with the information that's requested. You are also welcome to submit a public records request on our website as well. Regarding the budget specifically, this list shows different ways that you can engage, different ways that you can provide your feedback now throughout the budget process. There are some deadlines to know. You can go back and look at that timeline. One of them for the budget ahead of the public hearing on August 17th, that packet gets finalized and submitted out for the public to review, usually the Thursday before our Monday meeting. So if you would like your comments to be in the official public packet for the FY 2021 budget, please email that to the clerk's office by August 12th at noon. You can also sign up to do virtual testimony by noon. I won't read through all of this, but if you have any questions, you can also call our clerk's office. They're amazing. They would love to help you understand ways that you can engage and provide your feedback for our community. Please know we are working hard, and we appreciate the opportunity to serve our community. So with that, I think we're good. Thank you for joining us today, and have a great day.